Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. US President Donald Trump says he will reimpose international sanctions against Iran at the UN next week. Talking to reporters, Trump said Washington will trigger the snapback mechanism as he dismissed Russia's call to hold a summit to discuss the matter. This comes a day after the UN Security Council rejected Washington's bid to extend a UN arms embargo on Tehran. Israel says its warplanes have hit Hamas positions in the Gaza Strip in response to rocket attacks. The Israeli army says the raids followed a night of cross-border clashes with the Palestinian protesters. The Gaza Health Ministry said Israeli gunfire at protesters wounded 2 Palestinians. In Thailand, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Bangkok demanding the removal of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. They call for reforms to the country's powerful monarchy and an end to the military's domination of politics. Accusation of corruption and economic fallout from the coronavirus pandemic further fueled anger among the protesters. Globally, the novel coronavirus pandemic has taken over 770,000 lives and infected more than 21.4 million people. In the US, nearly 1,100 people have died due to COVID-19, while nearly 50,000 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Brazil has registered over 41,500 new coronavirus cases and 709 deaths in a day. India has recorded 944 fatalities, taking toll to nearly 50,000 with almost 2.6 million cases. In Pakistan, the death rate continues to decline as 6 people have died overnight, taking tally to 6,168. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. US President Donald Trump says he will reimpose international sanctions against Iran at the UN next week. Talking to reporters, Trump said Washington will trigger the snapback mechanism. Talking about Russia's call to hold a virtual summit on the matter, Trump said his participation was unlikely before the US presidential poll in November. This comes a day after the UN Security Council rejected Washington's bid to extend a UN arms embargo on Tehran. Meanwhile, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani said the failed UN vote was a humiliating defeat for Washington.
This is the first time that the US has proposed a resolution to the UN Security Council, and only a small island nation has voted in favor of it. Look, where America's effort have got them. What a miserable situation they have reached. Yesterday was a political success for the Islamic Republic of Iran and a political and legal defeat for the US regime.
Israel says its warplanes have targeted multiple locations on the Gaza Strip. In a statement, the Israeli military said its warplanes have hit Hamas positions in response to rocket attacks. It said the raids followed a night of cross-border clashes with the Palestinian protesters. The Israeli army alleged dozens of Palestinians burned tires, hurled explosive devices towards its security fence. The Gaza Health Ministry said Israeli gunfire at protesters wounded 2 Palestinians. Thousands of Israelis have called for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resignation over corruption allegations and his handling of the COVID-19 crisis. Protesters clashed with police outside the residence of the embattled Prime Minister. Details in this report.
Netanyahu's approval ratings have plunged to under 30% in recent weeks due to graft allegations and tumbling economy. The economy is expected to contract by 6% and unemployment in the country stands at 21.5%. Protesters called Netanyahu a crime minister, criticizing the government over its failure to protect jobs and businesses.
He did so many wrong things to his people, to us. The corruption is above of it, okay? He's corrupted, he's mean, he's cynical, and he's using us, and he's a thief, and he's a dictator. Simply as that, dictator.
Netanyahu's right-wing party accused the left-wing faction of backing the riots while censoring the media over alleged anti-government propaganda.
The US has urged the Kabul administration and the Taliban to start inter-Afghan negotiations as soon as possible. In a tweet, a special representative, Zalmay Khalilzad, called on the stakeholders to accelerate the peace process. Khalilzad also condemned yesterday's attack on peace negotiator Fawzi Yaqoufi. He said the Kabbalian criminal act was committed by those who seek to disrupt the peace process. Earlier last week, the Grand Lawyer Jirga approved the release of remaining Taliban prisoners to pave a way for intra-Afghan talks. France has asked the Afghan government not to release Taliban fighters who are convicted of killing French citizens. Kabul is in the process of releasing lost Taliban prisoners as it aims to conduct peace talks with the group. France's foreign minister expressed concern over freeing the fighters convicted of crimes against French soldiers and humanitarian workers. It said France strongly opposes the decision and has asked the Afghan government not to proceed with the release, while Afghanistan has already released 80 of the 400 prisoners. Earlier, the Taliban accused Kabul of propagating against its prisoners to halt the start of intra-Afghan negotiations. In Thailand, thousands of protesters have taken to the streets of Bangkok demanding the removal of Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. The protest was one of the biggest since Prayut took power in 2014 military coup. Junta leader Prayut won elections last year that the opposition says were held under rules to ensure that he keeps power. The country's most vocal opposition party was subsequently banned. Since July, student groups around Thailand have rallied almost daily against the government. The latest drew a wider support for their demands. They call for the reforms to the country's powerful monarchy. And an end to the military domination of politics. The arrest of student leaders and the economic fallout from the coronavirus pandemic further fueled anger among the protesters, while the Prime Minister has appealed for national unity. 2 rockets have hit Iraq's Taji base, housing US-led coalition troops in the north of the capital city of Baghdad. Coalition spokesperson Colonel Miles Kaggins said there were no casualties as no one was in the vicinity of the impact. Coalition military bases have been a target of regular rocket attacks since October last year. In the past, the US blamed hardline elements of the armed Hashd al-Shabi network for the attacks. Turkey says it has killed 9 militants of the Kurdistan Workers' Party in airstrikes during a counter-terrorist operation in northern Iraq. The Defense Ministry said the military operations were carried out in the Haftanin, Zab and Avasin regions. It said 3 fighters were killed in Haftanin while 6 others in Zab and Avasin. The ministry said Turkey will continue to destroy weapon caches and shelters used by the terrorists. It said over 400 Kurdish militants have been killed in northern Iraq over the past 5 months, with 143 killed in the last 10 days. Ankara launched operations Claw Tiger and Claw Eagle earlier in June to neutralize the threat of PKK and other terrorist groups. Going on globally, the novel coronavirus pandemic has taken over 770,000 lives and infected more than 21.4 million people. In the US, nearly 1,100 people have died due to COVID-19, while nearly 50,000 people tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, Brazil has registered over 41,500 new coronavirus cases and 709 deaths in a day. More in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic continues to wreak havoc across the globe as several regions face a re-emergence of the deadly disease. The virus has overwhelmed healthcare facilities and people's daily lives in Latin American countries of Mexico and Brazil. In the US, President Donald Trump lauded his administration's efforts to contain the virus, despite the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warning of another deadly wave during the approaching fall season.
If you look at these numbers, they're coming down very substantially. And I do believe that Americans, many are wearing masks, which is a good thing. Again, some people thought that you shouldn't wear masks. You know, when this whole thing started, Dr. Fauci, who I like and respect, said don't wear masks, okay? And so did Dr. Redfield. And then all of a sudden, it was like everybody should wear masks. And that's okay. People can change their mind.
In Europe, the virus is surging once again in Germany as the UK imposed mandatory quarantine for travelers from the country as well. France is looking to enforce mandatory mask wearing in workplaces, with 252 new clusters reported in the country. Elsewhere, authorities in New Zealand are scrambling to contain the disease by introducing fresh lockdowns after 13 people tested positive overnight.
Turning to the 12 cases in the community, all are Auckland-based, and based on our current information, none has travelled outside the Auckland region recently. From early investigations, all have a connection to the existing outbreak as close contacts of cases already reported. So saying, 2 of the new cases are household contacts of the case we've previously reported that is still under investigation.
South Korea has reported over 200 cases during the last 24 hours, the most infections in a day in over 5 months. Meanwhile, China has reported 19 new COVID-19 cases on the mainland.
Meanwhile, in India, the death toll from COVID-19 has neared 50,000 as the country reported 944 fatalities in the last 24 hours. The Health Ministry says 63,489 new cases were recorded, with the tally crossing 2.5 million. There are over 677,000 active cases in the country. India has been reporting over 60,000 cases daily since August the 7th. India remains the third worst hit country from the new coronavirus after the US and Brazil. In Pakistan, new cases and deaths from COVID-19 continue their downward trend, and experts believe the country is flattening the curve. The Health Ministry says in the last 24 hours, 6 people have died, while 670 tested positive for the virus. The country's death toll stands at 6,168, while the reported infections are over 288,000. The ministry says as much as 90% of the patients have recovered. It said the number of active cases has reduced to 16,000. Facebook has reportedly ignored its hate speech policy and allowed anti-Muslim posts on its platform to avoid ruining the relationship with India's ruling party. A Wall Street Journal report says a top company executive in India refused to apply the company's hate speech rules to Bharatiya Janata Party politicians. It said Anki Das opposed applying the rules to Tiger Raja Singh, at least 3 other Hindu nationalist individuals and groups. The report said the right-wing politician had demanded mainly Muslim Rohingya refugees to be shot. He called India's Muslims traitors and threatened to demolish mosques in his Facebook posts and public speeches. In March, a Facebook employee responsible for policing the platform suggested banning his account. The report said Das told staff members that punishing violations by politicians from Modi's party will damage the company's business prospects. More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Belarus says Russia has pledged its comprehensive assistance to ensure the security of the country. State media said Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko and Russia's President Vladimir Putin discussed the ongoing Minsk protests over the phone. Moscow is yet to confirm any agreement in this regard. In a statement, Kremlin said the ongoing crisis following last Sunday's presidential election in Belarus will be resolved soon. This comes as hundreds of thousands are out on the streets of Minsk protesting alleged rigging as Lukashenko secured a 6th term in office. In the violent clashes, 1 person has been killed, while authorities have detained thousands of protesters. In Russia, nearly 2,000 people have marched in the city of Khabarovsk against the government's handling of a local political crisis. The protests have entered the 6th consecutive weekend against the detention of Governor Sergei Furgo. Protesters said they do not agree with the government's actions and called it criminal. They said the government robbed their region and cities. Chanting slogans against the Kremlin, the demonstrators demanded the release of Fogel. Khabarovsk, a popular governor, was arrested on murder charges, which he denies. In the U.S., right-wing demonstrators have fought with the leftist counter-protesters in Georgia, Michigan, and Oregon states, drawing in riot police and SWAT teams. This comes as months of anti-racism protests have increasingly pitted Americans against one another. Several dozen demonstrators staged rallies in various states as part of the ongoing Black Lives Matter protests. A mix of militia members, Confederate followers, and supporters of President Donald Trump faced off against more than 100 left-wing protesters. After hours of shouting and the burning of Confederate flag, the protests devolved into scuffles and fistfights. Witnesses say they heard gunshots, but police have not yet commented on the claims. U.S. President Donald Trump says he will consider pardoning former National Security Agency whistleblower Edward Snowden. He is facing criminal charges over leaking classified documents about widespread government surveillance in 2013. At a news conference, Trump said a lot of people believe that Snowden is being treated unfairly. He said his administration was split over the issue as the former NSA contractor had committed some very bad things.
Well, I'm going to look at it. I mean, I'm not that aware of the Snowden situation, but I'm going to start looking at it. There are many, many people. It seems to be a split decision. That many people think that he should be somehow treated differently, and other people think he did very bad things. And I'm going to take a very good look at it.
Snowden is charged with violating the Espionage Act, which carries a prison sentence. Now moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump's younger brother, Robert Trump, has died at the age of 71. In a statement, Trump paid tribute, saying he was not just his brother, but also a best friend. Details about the cause of his death are unclear, but Robert had been hospitalized in New York for several days. Several media outlets say he spent over a week in the intensive care unit of Manhattan's Mount Sinai Hospital in June. Robert was the youngest of 5 siblings and 2 years younger than the U.S. president. The U.S. and South Korea are set to conduct their annual joint military drills this week. This year's exercises will be scaled down and will not involve U.S.-based troops amid COVID-19 travel restrictions. In a statement, South Korea's Joint Chief said the annual drills will focus on a combined defense posture. The statement said the exercises for the transition of wartime operational control on the Korean peninsula will be partly conducted. Meanwhile, North Korea says the planned excursions are a rehearsal for a war. Sudan and Egypt have expressed optimism after the fresh round of negotiations over the Blue Nile Dam dispute. In a Khartoum meeting, Sudan's Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok and Egypt's Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli agreed that dialogue is the only way to resolve the long-standing row. Meanwhile, Pope Francis called for dialogue between Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan over the Nile Dam issue. Speaking in the Vatican City, the pontiff urged the 3 neighbors not to let the dispute lead to a conflict. Earlier, the trilateral talks between the 3 countries were suspended after Ethiopia insisted on renegotiating a deal on sharing the waters of the Blue Nile. A UAE and Israeli firm have signed an agreement to cooperate on research and development related to COVID-19. The UAE's state news agency said Apex National Investment agreed on a strategic commercial agreement with Israel's Terra Group. In a statement, Apex chief said the deal will open pathways to develop effective partnerships between the business sectors of both the countries. It said the treaty will benefit humanity as it aims to strengthen research regarding the pandemic, including a feasible testing device. This comes soon after Tel Aviv and Abu Dhabi announced an agreement to normalize their relations. In the U.S., firefighters are still battling a massive blaze near the California and Nevada border. The National Weather Service has warned blaze in Loyalton City could cause potential firewalls. Authorities say part of Lawson County, situated in the north of the state, are most at threat. They have issued evacuation orders for the Plumas and Larson counties. The Weather Service asked responders to exercise extreme caution as a dash cam recorder captured a firefight narrowly escaping the inferno. The Loyalton fire has burned around 20,000 acres with 5% containment so far. Investigators believe one major fire near Los Angeles may have been started by arson. A Japanese bulk carrier that has leaked hundreds of tons of oil off the Mauritius coast has broken apart. In a statement, the Mauritius National Crisis Committee said on the basis of the experts' advice, the towing plan is being implemented. Authorities say they have deployed booms to help with oil absorption around the vessel. The committee said it is giving special attention to sensitive sites around the ship. In late July, Japanese-owned carrier with 4,000 tons of the fuel ran aground on a coral reef, causing an ecological emergency. Tokyo has pledged to send a team of experts from Environment Ministry to assess the damages. Another weather situation from around the globe. And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.